Fishies and sleuths alike. Welcome to Turn the Tide Thursdays. Feel free to get settled in, put your fins up, come listen and enjoy a Nancy Drew mystery book. I'm Desert Mermaid, but some of you who've met me in person know me as Mermaid Cora. As you can probably hear, I have had a cold. So I've got a different sounding voice this week. I missed you guys last week when I was having my yearly third Thursday of the month activity with friends. And I'm excited to get back into reading. We are about halfway through Nancy Drew in the mystery of the glowing eye. We keep hearing about a warning about a Cyclops known from Greek mythology, talking about that Cyclops, and they have one eye, and warning us to beware the Cyclops. All the meanwhile, Nancy Drew's special friend, constant date, Ned Nickerson, has been kidnapped, and they have not heard anything from him. Not Nancy, not his parents. They're all really worried. And so the base of operations has been at the college Ned goes to, a little bit not too bad of a drive away from River Heights where Nancy lives, but a little bit away. Emerson College. Last thing that we were reading is Nancy had been looking at maps, seeing if there's any place that you gotta take by foot or that you can only see through helicopter, because somehow a helicopter is involved. And they looked like they may have found a spot where a helicopter has been hiding. And so we continue this journey. Know that I am not ignoring you. I am going to answer comments about every chapter, in between chapters. But anyways, we are starting with chapter 11, Wilderness Cabin. As the copter turned and flew off, George said, "Come on, let's follow that pilot." Bess looked at her cousin in amazement. "How would you do that?" she asked. "I didn't bring my wings." The others laughed, but Nancy's eyes were focused on the direction the helicopter had taken. It was going in a westerly direction. Where would it land? Bert spoke up. "Maybe that craft isn't connected with your mystery case, Nancy." "You could be right," she replied. "But the copter certainly looked like the one that landed on my front lawn. We never could follow it, though. Let's go on to the swamp." They finally came to the edge of the mucky area and trudged up the hill, which, according to what Nancy had read, stood in the center of the swamp. The incline was steep. Low-growing bushes and trees, partially withered, grew here and there on the hillside. A lot of shale-like rock made the climb hazardous. Presently, Bess stopped. "This is positively the worst hike I have ever taken." Her cousin George teased, "It's going to be worse on the other side. Cheer up." When the group reached the top of the hill, they surveyed the landscape in front of them. The swamp below looked wider than the one through which they had just come. When they reached it, the young people also found it was much more treacherous than the other one. They sloshed along in ankle-deep mud, then stopped to wash it off whenever they came to clear pools of water. It was comparatively still in the wooded swamp, but suddenly a crow took off from the ground with a screech. It landed in a treetop and cawed raucously. Nancy smiled. I guess he's warning the flock that there are intruders on his premises. Though the going was rough, the group did not think about the arduous hike. They became interested in the beauty of nature around them. Look over there, said Dave, a ringneck pheasant. The large iridescent bird with a white ring of feathers around its neck did not stir from the log on which it was standing, its long tail sweeping out behind. Listen, George said a few minutes later. The trekkers stopped and became silent. Hear that warbler? George asked. They could detect the dainty trilling notes of the warbler's song, but it took time for them to find the bird. Finally, Bess saw it seated high on the branch of a tree. There it is. Nancy remarked, From here it looks like a bird without a head. If it weren't for his eyes, you wouldn't know he had one. He looks as if a black mask had been pulled down over the upper part of his head. I guess that's why it is called the hooded warbler. Did you know, George asked, that the female of the species doesn't have a mask? I suppose that's so she'll surely be seen by the boy warblers. The group laughed and went on. Bess, intrigued by the wildlife, kept looking up. Without warning, she stepped into a deep hole of muddy, greenish water. Instantly, the others pulled her out, but she was a mess. Nancy took several tissues from her pocket, began to clean her friend's legs. Ugh, Bess said suddenly. Look at these things crawling around on me. Dave said kindly, They won't hurt you. They're only miniature salamanders. He tore leaves from several bushes and helped wipe off Bess's dungarees and sweater, while George and Nancy worked on the girl's hair. What am I going to do? Bess wailed. Grin and bear it, George replied, but she did admit feeling sorry for her cousin. I guess from here on I'd better watch my step more carefully, Bess said finally. She was still shaking from her unexpected bath and held Dave's hand tightly for the rest of their trip through the swamp. Immediately ahead was a small open field, which everyone assumed must be the place from which the helicopter had taken off. Directly beyond was another swampy area. A small cabin painted dark green blended so well with the surrounding growth that it was hardly noticeable. Should be the place where Ned is being held, Nancy said excitedly. The three girls and their companions walked across the field and gingerly went forward. The ground was spongy, caking their boots with mud, but walking was not as difficult as it had been in the swamp. No one said anything at first. Then George commented, That swamp sure was an obstacle course, and I don't relish going back through it. Nor I, Bess said. I hope somebody can figure out a different way of getting to the place where we left the car. Nobody answered her because all of them were sure they would have to return along the same route. Nancy hurried in front of the group and walked up to the cabin door. She knocked. No one replied. She pounded loudly, but in vain. Nobody home, she said, unless someone's hiding in there. Nancy added that it was possible Ned was a prisoner and could not make a sound. He must be rescued. She tried the door, and finding it unlocked, she walked in. Her friends followed. No one was in sight. All gasped in astonishment. The one-room cabin was a fully equipped electronic laboratory with 2 cots, a small stove, and well-stocked shelves of canned food. Well, Sherlock Holmes, said George to Nancy, what are your thoughts now? Before replying, Nancy began to examine the laboratory. Bert and Dave did also. There were all sorts of gadgets and open notebooks with numbers which meant nothing to the visitors. Meanwhile, Bess had been looking around. She announced that there were no clothes in the place. Do you suppose whoever lives here knew we were coming and skipped out? She asked. Otherwise, why would anyone leave all this good food? Meat, eggs, milk, and bread. I could eat some of it right now. Presently, Bert and Dave called to the girls to come to a quarter of below. We've discovered a remote control outfit, and here's the sending set. And over there, Dave added, are computer and programming tapes. Are you saying, George spoke up, that the robot copter was kept here and its movements were controlled from this cabin? It looks that way. Bess asked, do you think Ned, Crossan, and the red-haired nut were in the copter we saw flying away from here? I have a strong feeling, Nancy said, that Crossan and the red-haired nut are one and the same person. I believe that Ned in his note was trying to tell us that Crossan is crazy and dangerous. Dave reminded the others that they are just doing a lot of guessing. We haven't come across one single thing around here to prove who the occupants are. Nancy agreed with Dave and said that it was important they try to find out. Let's all hunt for a clue, she proposed. Everyone went to work. There was complete silence for a long time. Nancy looked under both cots and pulled them from the wall. Suddenly, her eyes fastened upon a mark which had been cut into the wood of the wall. At first glance, it seemed to be a W. Was it someone's initial? She called her friends' attention to it, and they came over to look at the initial. Nancy squinted her eyes and stared at it. Suddenly she said, this isn't a W. I'm sure it's two N's. And that could stand for Ned Nickerson. Bess, George, and the boys leaned over to examine the mark. They all agreed that indeed it was N. This is where Ned must have slept, Bert said. And I'm convinced he was taken away in the copter we saw leaving here. Do any of you think he'll be brought back? Dave spoke up. I don't. No one did, but Bert and Dave were inclined to think that Ned's captor might return. They were of the opinion that he would not leave the valuable equipment unguarded for long, although the possibility of it being taken in this forsaken place was slim. Nancy was quiet for several minutes while the rest searched some more. When they reported that there were no other clues, she told the group that a possibility of getting to the main road without hiking there had just occurred to her. What is it? Bess asked eagerly. I certainly would like to be rescued from this creepy place. The quicker, the better, George added. Nancy turned to the boys. Do you think we could possibly contact the police over the two-way radio set here? We could tell them our suspicions regarding this cabin and the takeoff of the copter. She looked at Bess and grinned. If they come by helicopter, they might even give us a ride back to our car. Dave offered to try contacting headquarters. And look at that. We are already headed towards chapter 12, Hidden Notes. Alrighty. Bert and Dave bent over the sending set, trying to figure out how the various gadgets worked. This is a complicated one, Dave remarked. George, who had a little coaching along these lines from her father, an electronic engineer, made several valuable suggestions. "Where are the call letters?" she asked. The young people examined every inch of the set but could find none. "I wonder whom the kidnapper was calling. Some pal or a member of a Cyclops gang?" George asked. The boys said they wished they knew and went on with their examination, hoping desperately to get the set to respond. Finally, they hit the right combination, and in a moment, Bert's signal was answered. He said, "Calling from station without call letters. Who are you?" The listener seemed reluctant to reply and asked, "Why don't you have call letters? Everybody does." "We're in trouble here. Owner is away. No clue to call letters," Bert told him. The ham radio operator turned out to be answering from a town not far away. Bert told him he was calling from a swamp and then said, "There are 5 of us here. It's near Arbutus. Will you phone the police department and ask if they'll come out here? We've made an important discovery about a missing person." Nancy stood listening. She began to shake her head to indicate that Bert had told enough. He nodded and put a finger over his lips to indicate he understood. "Will you please do this for us?" Bert asked the ham. "I'm Bert Elton. I attend Emerson College. You can check there if you like." The man said he would be glad to help and asked, "Where are you?" Bert gave him directions from Arbutus, then said over. Nancy and her friends hoped fervently that the ham would not think the message was some kind of a joke and pay no attention to it. "There's nothing we can do but wait," said Bess with a sigh. "In the meantime," Nancy spoke up, "we can continue searching this place." All but Nancy went outside to look for clues. She felt that if Ned had been outdoors, he would have tried to escape and not bothered or had time to leave a clue. More than likely, he was kept in one spot, either chained up or threatened with dire punishment if he tried to get away. "We know he used this cot," Nancy thought, gazing at it for a full minute. She decided to pull the cot apart to see if anything was hidden inside. First, she took off 2 blankets, shook them vigorously, and looked over every inch of them. She found nothing. Next, Nancy picked up the mattress and laid it on the floor. To her amazement, she saw dozens of small notepad sheets with Ned's writing on them lying on the springs. Eagerly, she picked up one and read the message, which looked as if it had been hurriedly scrawled. There was a date on the paper, the day Ned was kidnapped. The note said, "Cannot understand why I was kidnapped when Cyclops could have stolen what he wants if he had waited a little longer." There were other notes written the following day. One read, "Am being pretty well fed and comfortable, but this madman threatens me with a gun whenever I move." There was a daily series of notes telling of Ned's treatment, how one ankle was chained to the bed, and his captor's endeavors to keep him away from the lab even when he let him get a little exercise. Nancy came across an entry with no date on it, but the contents were very enlightening. It said that his kidnapper had prepared the robot helicopter for a flight to Nancy Drew's home. Ned had begged to see the copter, and the man had finally consented and taken him outside. When my captor was not looking, I slipped a note to Nancy onto the floor. Nancy was elated. "That's mystery number 1 cleared up," she murmured. At this point, Bess and George came into the cabin to see if Nancy had learned anything. They were astounded at her discovery of the notes. "It puzzles me," Bess said, "why the name Crossan doesn't appear in any of those notes." George replied that it could mean the kidnapper was not Crossan after all, and he never told Ned his name. Nancy decided to copy the notes in case the police should come and want them. She had just finished when the girls became aware of a whirring sound in the air. Quickly, Nancy stuffed both sets of notes into her pocket. Then she restored the bed to its normal look and went outside. A police helicopter was arriving. As soon as it set down, the young people went over to talk to the men. The ham had done what he had promised. Tell us everything that has happened, one of the officers said after 3 men had alighted. As quickly as possible, Nancy gave them the highlights of the story and showed them the notes Ned had written and her copies of them. This looks serious, the captain remarked. I'll take your copies to turn over to the FBI. If we need the originals, I'll let you know. What's the registration number of the copter? Nancy replied, We didn't see it today, but the one we saw the first time turned out to be a fake. After hearing the story, 2 of the 3 officers decided to stay at the cabin in case the suspected kidnapper returned. The pilot told the young people he would take them to their car and to climb aboard. In a short time, Nancy and her friends were delivered to the automobile. They thanked him and he wished them luck. He warned the young people to be careful in their future sleuthing. The kidnapper sounds like a bad one. The pilot flew off and Bert took the wheel of Nancy's car. When they reached the fraternity house, Bess could hardly wait to get under the shower. She had said nothing more about her sudden spill in the swamp, but she felt very itchy. The other girls washed and changed too, then joined the boys for dinner. When they finished eating, Bert and Dave said that they had to attend a night lecture. Sorry not to be here to entertain you girls, Dave said, but we'll make up for it sometime, promise. Bess laughed. I've had enough entertainment for one day. See you when you get back from your lecture. She and George went off to talk to some of the other boys. Nancy was torn between her desire to stay with them and a sudden feeling of curiosity about Ned's notes. There might be some clues in them which she had not noticed. In the guest room, she sat down and reread the notes, then examined each one through her magnifying glass. But she could not detect she could detect no hints to Ned's whereabouts, nor to why he had been kidnapped. Nancy sat staring into space. Then, on a sudden hunch, she closed the door to the hall and turned off the lights. She almost yelled aloud in surprise. Drawn in the corner of one note in fluorescent ink was an exact duplicate of the mysterious glowing eye she had seen at the Anderson Museum. How strange, Nancy thought. She began to wonder whether Ned had put this on the paper sometime before his kidnapping, or if by some ruse he had been able to use certain materials in the cabin's lab. Then Nancy remembered that one note indicated Ned was not allowed far from his cot. The paper with the glowing eye must have been from a notepad her friend was carrying when he arrived at the isolated cabin. The message on the paper doesn't light up, so it probably has nothing to do with the glowing eye, she thought. Nancy had just turned all the lights back on when the door opened and George and Bess came in. Instantly, Nancy said, I'll show you something very interesting. Turn off all the lights. When Bess and George saw the glowing eye on the paper, they stared in disbelief. Nancy told them she wondered if Ned had put the glowing eye on the sheet as some sort of clue for her. What I wish I could do right now is figure out where he is at this moment. Oh dear, we came so close to rescuing him. Bess put an arm around Nancy. Don't be sad, we'll track him down yet. George suggested that the kidnapper probably would bring Ned back to the cabin as soon as he thought it was safe. He'll never guess that 2 officers are there waiting to capture him and set Ned free, she said. Bess, who had been staring at the glowing eye, asked Nancy if she thought the drawing on the notepaper might indicate something special about his work. Yes, I think Ned has invented something unique and tried it out on this paper, Nancy replied as she turned on the light. It may or may not have anything to do with the glowing eye in the museum. When he found it worked, he began to make a bigger and better one. At that point, someone decided to get hold of the invention and put it to his own use, maybe even sell the formula. Just then, Bert and Dave entered the room. At once, George suggested that they close the door and turn off the light. The boys laughed. Dave said, "What's going on?" "Wait until you see something amazing Nancy found," George replied. The boys were as astounded at the discovery as the girls had been. "It may not be long before we hear something important," Bess told the boys. "Ned's kidnapper may go back to that cabin and be captured by the police." Nancy, however, said she had a different idea. "What is it, Nancy?" George asked excitedly. And now we are on chapter 13, The Escape. We're just flying through these chapters. Chapter 13, The Escape. "Here's my idea," Nancy said to her waiting friends. "We're sure Crossan uses the old farmhouse. If he's the kidnapper, he might have taken Ned there." "It's a good guess," George conceded. Bess suggested that maybe Crossan would put Ned in the clothes chute. "No one would be likely to look for a missing person in that spot." "Another good guess," Dave remarked, smiling at Bess. George spoke up. "Then we should rescue Ned at once." "Yes," Nancy agreed. "And I have another hunch. Crossan may stay there only until early morning. Which of you is game to go with me right now?" Everyone in the group was eager to leave immediately. Bert did the driving, which gave Nancy a chance to mull over the many angles to the mystery. The red-haired man had outwitted her, and she was determined he would not do it again. She sighed, however. He was very clever and surely would try to outsmart them. Oh, Bert burst out. "Look ahead, blockade!" By now, they were about half a mile from the farmhouse. A wall of piled up stones stretched across the road. Atop this of it was a red lantern. Attached below was a large sign which read, "Danger, blasting ahead." There was no way to get around the wall at this point because trees grew rather solidly along the road. Bess asked, "What are we going to do?" Bert said he would drive around via another road and approach the farmhouse from the opposite direction. It took 20 minutes to do this. When they came within half a mile of the far side of the building, they were confronted with a great pile of brush across the road. The sides had high embankments. "Stimmied again," George remarked. Nancy pointed out the fact that there were no trees along the road in this area. "Let's walk and approach the house through the fields," she proposed. Bess reminded her that it probably would be rough walking. "What's the matter with the road? That's smooth." Nancy thought it was possible there was some truth in the sign at the stone barrier. The road might be torn up or have unexploded dynamite stored on it. However, she was suspicious that the person who put up the sign and the two barriers had done so to keep visitors away. "Why not notify the police and let them take care of everything?" Bess suggested. "But Ned may be a prisoner at the farmhouse," George reminded her. "Well, I'm ready to start. Who's willing to go along? I promise an adventure." "I'll wait in the car," Bess said. Dave decided to stay with her. It's too dangerous for Bess to be alone here. The others left them, climbed the embankment on the farmhouse side, and walked through the field. It was bright moonlight, so flashlights were not needed. The rutted ground could be spotted easily, so Bert and the girls had no trouble reaching the farmhouse quickly. They had walked as lightly as possible and not said a word. The abandoned house was in darkness. As the group skirted a small brook in copse of trees, they found themselves approaching the building from the rear. Suddenly, Nancy stopped short and pointed. The others looked ahead. Clearly outlined in the bright moonlight was a helicopter. Bert whispered to Nancy, "Is it the robot copter?" "Yes, if Crossan and Ned came in the copter, they must be here." Three young people started to run forward, but before they got very far, the rotors of the copter began to whir, and with a roar the craft lifted from the ground. Nancy could not refrain from shouting, "Ned, are you there? Ned, are you aboard?" Her friends took up the cry, but there was no answer or signal. Because of the noise, had the person or persons aboard been unable to hear them, or did they not want to answer? Perhaps there was no one in the craft. If so, was the person who had programmed it on the premises? Nancy and the others walked to the house. The front door was unlocked, so they entered. Aiming their flashlights, they searched every room thoroughly, watchful not to be captured themselves should an enemy be lurking in the house. Finally, after hunting everywhere, even in the close chute, Nancy said, "Ned isn't a prisoner here, so I believe he was in that copter. How I wish I knew where he was being taken." One thing she was sure of, the helicopter had not been headed for the swamp area, so unless the pilot made a change in direction, he was not going to the cabin. But where was he going? "We'd better notify the police," Bert suggested. "Two of the kidnappers' hiding places will be covered." Which means, George added, that sooner or later he and Ned are bound to be found. Unless, Nancy suggested, Ned's red-haired captor has still other hiding places. "We may as well go back to the car," Bert said. He told Bess and Dave what had happened, then suggested they all return to the fraternity house. On the way, he stopped in town at police headquarters, and Nancy hurried inside to tell her story. The captain on duty promised to send out men not only to wait for the return of Ned and his abductor, but also to scan every inch of the road that had been closed off. "If we find it okay, we'll take down the barrier so the road can be opened again to traffic," the officer said. "From what you tell me," he went on, "I imagine someone stood over your friend Ned with some kind of a firearm, and we didn't do all the work of building those barriers." Nancy smiled. "I agree. What I'm hoping is that Ned will not be badly mistreated before we find him." She gave the captain her home telephone number and also that of Ned's fraternity house at Emerson College. "If I have any news," the captain said, "I'll call you at once." When she and her friends reached the campus, Nancy suddenly was reminded of her date with Glenn Munson the following morning for a flight in his helicopter. "There's not much use in going now," she thought. "We found the wilderness hiding place." The young detective wondered how she could put the flying time to good use by doing some sleuthing. Suddenly an idea came to her. "Why don't I take the copter to River Heights and talk to Dad and Marty King?" she asked herself. "Both of them might have some information for me they wouldn't want to talk about on the phone." Nancy told the other girls what she had in mind, and early the next morning Bert drove her out to the airfield to meet Glenn. He was already there. "I've changed my plans," Nancy told him. "Would you mind flying to River Heights and spending a little time there?" The young pilot grinned. "Nothing would suit me better," he replied. Bert drove off, and Nancy climbed into the helicopter. In a few minutes, she and Glenn were in the air headed for River Heights. "Why this sudden change of plans?" he asked her. Nancy told him about what she and her friends had found at the wilderness hiding place. "Unfortunately, the people there took off in a copter just before we reached the place," she added. In short, while Glenn landed his craft at River Heights Airport, Nancy said that she wanted to go home first to see if there were any mail or messages for her. "At your command," the young man grinned as they walked toward a taxi. Nancy gave her address, and soon they were winding through the residential area of a small city. One more block and we're there, she announced as the taxi turned onto a street lined with attractive homes and sycamore trees. Excuse me. By the time Nancy alighted from the taxi, Hannah Gruen was rushing out the front door. She stopped short in amazement when she saw Nancy and Glenn. I thought for a moment you had come back with Ned, she exclaimed, glancing in embarrassment at Nancy's companion. Nancy introduced Glenn, and the three went into the house. The young detective gave Hannah the highlights of her recent adventures. The housekeeper frowned as she listened. Finally, she remarked, "That kidnapper is a slippery eel." She changed the subject abruptly and said she would prepare luncheon for Nancy and Glenn. "How long can you stay?" Nancy said she was uncertain. "I want to go downtown and talk to Dad and Marty King. If we're coming back here to eat, I'll phone you. In the meantime, will you keep your eyes and ears open for anything?" Hannah interrupted with a laugh. Will do," she said. "News or clues for Nancy Drew." "I want you to meet my dad," Nancy told Glenn. The couple walked downtown to Mr. Drew's offices. As they entered, Miss Hanson, his longtime secretary, greeted them pleasantly. After Nancy had introduced Glenn, she asked, "Is Dad in?" Miss Hanson shook her head. "He went out a few minutes ago." "Then I'll talk to Marty King," Nancy said. "Sorry," Miss Hanson replied, "but she went with your father. I believe they're going to the bank first, and then to lunch." Nancy tried hard not to show how upset she was by this information. Not willing to give up on trying to talk to her father, she inquired where they were going to eat. "I don't know," Miss Hanson said. "Do you want to leave a message?" Nancy asked the secretary if she had heard Marty King say anything about the mystery which he was trying to solve. Again, Miss Hanson shook her head. With a faint smile, she remarked, "Marty rarely tells me anything." Nancy said she would come back in a couple of hours. In the meantime, she and Glenn would return to the house for lunch. She picked up Miss Hanson's telephone and called Hannah. "We'll be back to have lunch," she said. "Anything you want me to pick up in town? Dessert, perhaps?" "I think not. Your dad ordered a special one for dinner. I'll serve some of it to you." "What is it?" Nancy asked. Hannah laughed. "It's one of your favorites, too. I want to surprise you." Nancy and Glenn walked back. As soon as they had finished eating Hannah's delicious lemon meringue pie, Nancy went to phone the Fanes and Marvins and tell them the latest news about their daughters. When she called the Fane home, George's father answered. "Hello?" "Hello, this is Nancy. I flew home for a few hours and I thought you and Mrs. Fane would like to know how we're progressing on the case." "Indeed we would." When Nancy finished telling him, Mr. Fane said, "Nancy, I too have some information in which I'm sure you will be vitally interested." In Chapter 14, Chili Conference. All right, my friends, my detectives, fishies. Unfortunately, I am deciding to call this case to an end. With my throat, with my cold, I just feel like it would be better to let myself rest. I'm just following the tide of what my body needs. And it's okay. Sometimes we do have to slow down and do things slower, maybe less time. But that doesn't mean we'll get back to it. You know? Um, there's a season for everything, and sometimes even the things that are consistent, those tides change. And I'm in a low tide right now. I got some low energy and I gotta rest to be better. So I hope that you guys have a wonderful rest of your Turn the Tide Thursday. Tomorrow is Friday. We're almost to the weekend. And if you're working over the weekend, we're there with you in spirit. Just take it one thing at a time. And we'll talk to you later. Bye bye.